Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Ransomware. It's not a matter of if, but when. This event is produced in partnership with Veeam. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be serving as your moderator on this webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got a great topic. This is a really hot topic lined up for you today, and an expert presenter with some really cool content. So before I introduce you to our presenter, just a few things that you should know about the webinar. First off, we want this to be an educational event, so we encourage your questions there in the left-hand side of your audience console. If you click on the questions tab, you can enter your question there. Of course, we welcome all the good morning or good afternoon, hello messages, but we also want your technical questions. I know many of you out there are struggling to protect yourselves and your company and your data from ransomware. So now's the time to get your questions in. Because we'll be queuing up the best questions for our Q&A session. We also have a couple of handouts there in the handouts tab. I want to call your attention to those handouts. I can do that to call your attention to that. The handouts there are Ransomware, a modern threat to modern data. This is an excellent resource here, tons of facts and statistics to help kind of justify better ransomware protection. And then the other resource is how to beat ransomware with education, how to implement and remediate with Veeam, written by Mr. Rick Vanover, who many of you might have seen or heard on the events here at Actual Tech Media in the past. A great resource, so make sure that you check that one out as well. Go ahead and download those. Those won't be as readily accessible after today's webinar. And then finally, if you're watching this live, we will be announcing at the end of the event the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card prize. If you're watching on demand, of course, the webinar has already concluded, and prize terms and conditions can be found there in the handouts tab. And with that, I'm excited to introduce you to today's expert presenter. Welcome, Mr. Michael Leeworthy, Principal Product Marketing Manager at Veeam. Michael, thank you so much for being on the event today.
Awesome. Thank you very much, David.
With that, I'll hand it off to you, Michael. Take it away.
Awesome, thanks, mate. So, and thank you very much for attending this. We know your time is sort of precious, and you know, we all have a really busy life. So I really enjoyed that you're taking this time to sort of listen to a little bit about ransomware and some of the things that we're seeing in the market, and then some of the capabilities that are we're investing in. And I'll actually talk a little bit about our future investment as well, which is sort of quite exciting. You know, because it's a major design and research aspect of Veeam is data security, and ransomware is the hot topic of data security right now. And so let's talk a little bit about, you know, what we mean by a modern threat to modern data. And the history of ransomware is really fascinating. If you think about where it sort of started, and originally when ransomware first started, it was almost apologetic. It was, you know, the real first corporate ransomware attack was actually driven out of North Korea, and you know, it encrypted files, and it was almost apologetic in its way. It was very, very hard to actually pay to unencrypt those files. It was really just testing the waters. And unfortunately, nefarious actors sort of saw that and went, okay, well, I think we can make money out of this. And you know, in the early days, it was, you know, $20, $25, $50, and again, it was sort of this very apologetic, you know, environment. But that quickly changed, and ransomware became you know, a way to exploit many organizations. And those $20, $25, $50, you know, ransomware asks and demands are now, you know, $500,000, $1 million, $2 million, and they ever increase. And you know, and a lot of that has been because of we've seen an advancement in, you know, digital currency as well, and crypto technology. So you know, bad actors have been able to hide their tracks a lot better. So they're getting a lot more bolder and asking for bigger and better ransoms. You know, and while a lot of governments and organizations are sort of looking at how they start to mandate things like ransomware, criminal activity, prosecution, you know, insurance associated with that, you know, when we take a step back and think about it as organization owners, as IT professionals and our organization, as I said, I'd like to walk you through the first couple of areas where we talk through some of the metrics associated that we see from our customers. So first, I want to talk a little bit about what is ransomware, and I'm sure most of us, if not all of us, know what ransomware is, but it's essentially malware that's, of course, maliciously created, and its ultimate idea is to encrypt organizations' files and storage, and then create some sort of demand associated to unencrypt those. And then as the poor recipient of those, I either pay that ransom and get the unencryption key. In many cases, I may pay the ransom and not get the unencryption key. And in most cases, even if I do pay the ransom, I'm liable to be attacked again and again and again. So it's definitely one of these sort of horrible, never-ending stories. And there's many flavors of ransom out there, but the three core ones that we sort of see today, and as I said, there are many flavors, and there's many different sort of flavors of these as well, but we definitely see Ryuk and Phobos as sort of like a core common flavors we out there as well. We've also seen further flavors of the Russian-born malware service as well. So, generally you'll see these as the premier ones we see in the press. Now, the funniest thing you'll see in the press is that most ransomware attacks that happen through the press, you'll see a common thing which says, it was a minor attack, or it didn't cause a lot of damage, or stuff like that. And that's generally brand protection. As an organization, the last thing I want to do is to say this ransomware, devastated my files, because it shows that I wasn't protecting that data. So there is a little bit of misinformation when it comes to sort of the success of ransomware attacks from a media perspective. So we can't be caught into this false sense of security, that ransomware is really only small, only attacking endpoints, one or two machines, when it's actually been quite devastating. And there is a lot of experiences about that. We actually had one, last month in Germany, which unfortunately a lot of ransomware is now attacking first responders and healthcare, because of the heavy investment in that and the need for that at the moment. It's an unfortunate reality. But, we had, in Germany, which unfortunately took down hospital admission systems. And it was the first ever ransomware case, and it won't be the last, but it was the first ever ransomware case that will be actually prosecuted as a murder, because there was unfortunately a person who died on the way to the hospital, where they couldn't check into the hospital, had to be transported to another hospital, and they died on the way to their second hospital. So we're seeing government step in now and actually look at criminal prosecution, not just from a white collar perspective, but the actual effects that this could have from a social. So it's becoming a global pandemic, and sorry to coin that phrase, and knowing that where we are today, but it's definitely becoming a sort of global pandemic when we think of that. Now, there are some real costs. As I said, some of these ransoms are millions and millions of dollars, but generally what we find is that most if not all organizations have to fend off some form of malware, whether it's a direct attack, an indirect attack, a knocking on the door, and multiple attacks happen, in what we've seen. In fact, unfortunately, in 2020, we're actually seeing a further increase. Even though that ransomware is almost doubling year after year, we're seeing a 20% more increase in ransomware attacks through 2020. Generally because of the distributed nature of our organizations now. So we're seeing a lot more endpoint ransomware attacks, because we have a lot more remote workers, and we can't secure them as much as we would like to, or lock them down as much as we like to. And so we're seeing unfortunately, a lot of nefarious activities in there. But if you think about some of the core costs, just outside of the ransom cost, but if you think about the average cost of downtime for a significant application that we would all run, it's about $65,000 to $70,000 per hour of cost to that organization, in revenue, in maintenance, in warm bodies to be able to manage and maintain. That's a lot of cost, and that almost it goes up a third for critical applications. So if you're talking about your main CRM systems and stuff, which may be critical, that can always be about $85,000, $90,000 per hour they're down. So you can see there's a lot of, just business cost associated with just having downtime associated with ransomware, not with the actual cost of having to recover from the ransomware themselves. One of the scary things is, recently, IDC was saying that out of all the net new data that's been created, 50% is actually not fully protected. Data has been created in such a fast and frenetic way that it's not being protected because our systems aren't automating those protections. As data is being created, as new workloads, as new modern application platforms are being, researched by our developers, and they're developing in new and interesting and fantastic ways, that data is not being protected, successfully from just a normal modern data protection perspective. And so that definitely opens up our surface area for attack, especially in ransomware, if that data is not recoverable. And if we look at 2019, the average recovery cost of ransomware, and this is not ransom cost, this is the average recovery cost if you didn't have effective ransomware capabilities in your data protection system, was about $90,000 US. So that was just the cost of recovering from a fairly basic a ransomware attack that would have attacked a data center. If you add that on top of the downtime associated with that, this could be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars associated with it. So there is a massive cost when we think about that. Now, I want to take a little bit of time and walk through some really interesting statistics that we just recently looked at with some organizations out there. Because everyone thinks ransomware sort of comes through in the spam email sense, and it does. You know what? Like, ransomware is not about direct attack. You know what I mean? Like, there definitely is direct attack, and you can have vulnerable exploits, and unfortunately, you could have issues in software that might be exploited. You could have network issues or VPN issues or firewall issues that are now people to come and inject things into the organization. Absolutely. And you can see on the left-hand side, I know there's a lot of data here, but you can see on the left-hand side, in the graph there is a list of like the various attacks that we sort of seen. But the interesting thing is, yes, spam email and Trojans are the sort of big attack points. And that is generally going, two things. One, education. I mean, there's a massive education thing. Spam email. It doesn't matter. I could have the best cybersecurity system on earth. If I have a user that just fortunately, unthinkingly just clicks on that executable or that infected PDF or that infected media file within my firewall, it could get a hold very, very quickly. And so a lot of ransomware protection is simple education, right? And having systems set up for that, having much more robust endpoint user systems versus just corporate-wide systems. But I think one of the interesting things here is RDP. Now, if you're like me, RDP is a time saver. I mean, I've administered many organizations, and RDP was the backbone of, especially in Windows-based organizations, RDP was the backbone way of doing things. And I took my RDP nature from an on-premises perspective, and as we grew into hybrid, into cloud, I took that same behavior. And as my virtual machines were spinning up in Azure and AWS, I used RDP. And did I think about the security vulnerability of RDP? No, I didn't. And I think that's something we need to do as IT professionals. We need to ensure that, when, how, and if we're using RDP, that we're using it very securely in VPNs, in different sockets, in different protocols, opening different ports, to be able to sort of protect ourselves from the piggyback that RDP does. But it's quite amazing when you think about, 21% of ransomware infection sources coming through just that general nature of RDP. It's quite a scary thing to think that me as an IT professional could actually be the source of ransomware in my organization because I just want to administer a server up on it, externally to where I'm sitting. There's some really other good, interesting data there as well when we think about the attack types within different regions and different organizations, in the sense of how the model changes from region to region and organization to organization. But you can see here, in most cases, spam email is going to be sort of the number one aspect associated with it. Now, if we double click into these things a little bit more, what are the main outcomes of ransomware attack? Well, we talked a little bit about this as well. Downtime, loss of productivity, and loss of data. Now, this is really, really interesting. So downtime, totally get it. I'm going to have those systems down. We talked about the average cost of downtime. Absolutely. Loss of data, for sure. Of course, it's going to be loss of data, because that's going to be sort of the main, goal of a ransomware attack, is that loss of data. If you don't pay us, you'll lose your data. You won't be able to get that data back. So the interesting thing here is loss of productivity. Again, it's not that hard, outcome, in the sense that, hey, you know what, I'm going to either lose that data or I'm going to have that downtime. You get people sitting around twiddling their thumbs, and that is a incredible cost on the organization. But then if you think about that, outside of those, there is a set of other real hits, in the sense of loss of business, reduced customer confidence, damaged brand reputation, financial impact. I mean, if you look at those figures, 4 plus 3 plus 2, I mean, you're looking at almost nearly 10% of the outcomes around customer satisfaction or loss of business. That is a huge outcome from a ransomware attack. And then if you add financial impact on that, you're almost nearly 20%, of the impact is actually financial and customer satisfaction, real hits to the bottom line. And this is why ransomware has become the number one concern of all CIOs sort of out there in the world. Now, if we think about ransomware infection, as I said before, what we're seeing now through 2020 is a real big growth of single endpoint device ransomware attack. And this has changed a little from 2019 and 2018, based on what we do on sort of the landscape at the moment. But endpoint's still going to be a significant, always going to be a significant sort of hit, because of just the mobile, reality of our workforces out there. So having a strong ability to monitor, maintain, secure, trust those endpoints, or maybe not trust those endpoints, should be part of any of our IT administration plans before we even think about how we look at protection and recovery. But you can see quickly and easily after that, we have sort of this concept of a small amount of data center and so on and so on. But it gives you that concept here, and it's a really sort of nice linear graph here that endpoint becomes the source of most of our malware intrusions, and then that will be the source back into our organization. So it gives me the ability here to look at where I do defensive walls, where I actually spend a lot of the cybersecurity threat analysis defensive dollars. How I think about isolation of endpoints. Do I think about quarantine of endpoints if I haven't been able to monitor and maintain them? There are big things, big sort of questions when I think about ransomware protection in my organization. Now, mitigating ransomware attacks. So when we asked a lot of customers, what steps are you taking to mitigate them? So what should the baseline be? What are you doing? What's being successful for you? And you can see there's a lot of answers to these based on where we are. But some really, really interesting pieces of data there. Investing in end user education is the highest, and this has continued to be the highest the last couple of years. It's funny to think that the way you mitigate from a ransomware attack is education, is literally sitting down with your end users and educating them on the best way to protect themselves, because they're your best and first front line of defense is just pure education. How do I ensure that my end users aren't doing things that they shouldn't, either intentionally or unintentionally, opening things that they shouldn't, bringing things into the network that they shouldn't? And that could be my number one defense. And then, then it sort of goes into the other things as well. detection technologies, network monitoring, secure internet access. I mean, they're sort of the core concepts in the sense, hey, if I can educate the end users, I can then encrypt networks so I don't get any piggybacks. I can put strong locks on my front doors and my windows. I can put locks on the perimeter, and then I think the biggest thing there is really bolstering the backup storage resiliency, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit more about here. Is what a lot of these things here is prevention. And when we think about ransomware prevention. And that's absolutely right. Cybersecurity monitoring, network monitoring, end user education, endpoint monitoring, they are definitely prevention perspectives. But as we talked about in the opening, it's not a matter of if, but when. Malware is going to attack your organization, and in most cases, it can get through. And so, you may catch 99 out of 100 malware attacks, but one may get through. How do you think about protection? And unfortunately, how do you have to think about recovery? And I want to sort of stress here in the sense that, every time I used to say the word recovery, the customers used to wince. I'm like, you got to think about recovery as a positive aspect into a ransomware attack. If ransomware happens, if there are systems that are encrypted, you should feel confident that you can, quarantine those, delete those out of existence, and recover back into production in the quickest possible time. So effectively, your recovery is a confident aspect to it. It's not a thing that's going to take days or weeks or months. It's a thing that is actually integrated into your normal, a recovery process or disaster recovery process. And this is where we need to sort of think about all assets of that. How do we do serious prevention? How do we do protection of our data? And then, if needed, how do we do fast and efficient recovery? So our downtime is minimal, if not none, based on what we're seeing. And then, if we think about data recovery, we actually talked to a bunch of Veeam organizations about data center ransomware, and we looked at organizations wide, and we said, hey, if you were looking at data recovery, did you pay to recover your data? And the vast majority will be able to recover data, or some part of that data, based on where they were in the systems. Now, this is an interesting piece of data. Now, one thing we don't break down here is what technology they were using, what software they were using. This is not just Veeam customers. This is customers of all data protection systems. But the concept here is, what we were looking at is, if a customer has a modern data protection system, those customers generally I think it's between 96 and 98% of the time, can recover without incident or without loss. If they don't have a modern data protection system, you can see here, then that's when the other 9 to 5% of the system, 5% of the issues come into it as well. So, if talking to a set of customers out there, both Veeam customers and non-Veeam customers, when we talked about data recovery, and as I said, I don't have the next breakdown on this, which which shows what systems they were using. I didn't think that was wise for me to show other systems out there, or fair of me to show other systems out there. But I wanted to sort of show here in the sense that organizations with modern data protection systems, in most, if not all cases, were able to recover their data without paying. And that's the concept here. You have to have a modern data protection system to be able to recover and confidently recover without having to resort to either rebuilding or manual recovery, or in horrible cases having to pay those. And let's go return back to this one. When we talk specifically about Veeam customers, as I said, when I talked about specifically about Veeam customers, with a modern data protection system like our Veeam solution, 96% of our customers were able to recover majority, if not all, of their data with very little investment. In fact, 76% were able to spend nothing at all. And this is over and above their normal data backup and data recovery recovery budget. The extra cost would be, the under 5,000 would be the extra effort needed to do something outside their normal recovery processes. They might have had to put someone on for a couple of hours to do some replication back from a third-party glacial storage or something like that. But you can see here that, again, with a modern data protection system, the cost of recovering from a ransomware attack can be very, very minimal into your organization. So what do we do to help that out? So let's talk a little bit about that. We want to focus on three sort of core areas when we think about ransomware recoverability and protection. One, resiliency against ransomware threats. Now, when I talk about resiliency about ransomware threats, I think there are three sort of core areas when we think about resiliency. There's sort of ransomware detection, there's ransomware prevention, ransomware detection, ransomware detection, protection, and recovery. I'm getting myself mixed up. So when we think about Veeam, we like to try to focus on what are the areas of prevention from a detection perspective, from a protection perspective, and then from a recovery aspect. Now, our first biggest asset is not our ability to encrypt data, to protect data, to make data immutable, to replicate data. Our first aspect is portable data. Portable data is one of the linchpins when we think about recovering from any solution. Now, many legacy data protection systems require some sort of connection to a master database. To be able, they essentially, back up the data in a very customized meta file, and you need connection to that master system to be able to understand the structure of that meta file, to be able to explain that data, to be able to recover that data. Now, what happens if that master system has been under attack or unavailable for some reason? Then the data you might actually have all this data, but you can't recover it. And so we wanted to completely mitigate that and create a customized, isolated, portable data system that enables the data to be self-explanatory, so the data can recover even if you don't have the Veeam backup solution or the Veeam backup application up and running. You can still recover that data if it's being backed up from a Veeam solution. So this is super important. Important if you've got data that's sitting in an isolated, immutable system, say up in AWS, and you want to recover back that to on-premises, you can easily do that through a portable data format. So that was a very super investment for us. From an aspect as well, we like to ensure that an organization can then deploy their solution no matter how their systems are set up. We're not tied into a hardware world or a physical world, or tied in 100% into a cloud world. As a Veeam solution holder, you have the ability to deploy that in a physical structure or in a virtual structure on premises, in a cloud structure on all popular commercial clouds, and also in a managed format as well through backup as a service and DR as a service through managed service providers as well. So it gives you a lot of different flexibility to say, hey, I might be 40% on premises or 60% on premises and 40% in the cloud. I don't have to worry about different systems and different aspects. The ability to be software-defined and hardware agnostic enables us to provide the most reach across any platform out there. And so these were really important design principles when we thought about those Veeam solutions. And then when we think about our capabilities as a framework, we think about identifying things that are happening in the organization. So one of the things about malware detection is, you can have cybersecurity threat analysis and all these tools, and they're phenomenal tools that you have to have. We as a backup vendor actually can monitor a lot of data, and we know if data has changed unexpectedly because there's that historical view, in the sense that because the data is being backed up at a regular cases, maybe it's being consistently backed up every 15 minutes, every hour, twice an hour, twice a day, once a week, whatever your process is, that you build a historical view of that data. So if that data changes unexpectedly, we can actually create really good alerting and monitoring associated with that. So as a ransomware detection technology, while we're not a cybersecurity tool in that way, we can actually help as part of the detection process. And in fact, I'll talk a little bit more how we can delve into that sort of identification in a real-time perspective. But when data changes, one of the things it can throw up is to say, hey, this data changed unexpectedly. It's grown, it's shrunk, something's different about this data. You should go and have a look at it because it may be the first signs that there is a malware attack associated with that. Protection, of course, 3-2-1 rules, 3 different types of backups, 2 different platforms, 1 offsite, right? So keep 3 copies of your backup on 2 different platforms and 1 offsite. That's a really, really important aspect, and we should completely live by this in our normal backup perspective. But the 1 offsite, now we need to be thinking about immutability. And immutability is just air gapping, right? I need to be able to have a replica of that backup that's sitting somewhere that is read-only. It can't be gotten to. Now, why is that important? The reason that's important because ransomware is really smart now. And one of the first things it looks for is backup and archive files, because it knows the first thing you're going to do when you find out ransomware is just quarantine it, blast it out of existence, and recover from your backup. So it goes after those backup files and those replication files as one of its first priorities because, and generally it does that before you even notice the attack. So, the idea of having a read-only storage that is completely, air-gapped, and that air-gapping could be object storage, it could be tape, having that capability is just incredibly important when we think about ransomware protection, because that is my last and best level of defense. When all things get to the point when I need to move into recovery, I have to have 100% confidence that I can recover a non-affected, non-attacked, pristine production system. And I can do that and have that 100% confidence with immutable storage. I talked a little bit about detection aspects as well from an identification perspective. So being able to do sort of these AI-driven monitoring alerts associated with detection. We also now have a new data integration API that enables you to take third-party tools and integrate them straight into your backup. Now, let me say that again. You can actually take a third-party analytics tool. So say if you take a security threat analysis tool, right, you could point your backup into a third-party analytics tool, and it will integrate into the analytics tool and inform it of any type of changes in the data. So if you have a threat analysis system, the Veeam backup solution now can become part of your major threat analysis system, and therefore we can report on, hey, this, as I said, this data has changed, something's changed here. I'm going to tell the threat analytics system that has changed. So that's a really just a great evolution in having the ability to, have a central source of truth around your backup files, and use data analytic aspects to it. As I said, I gave one example of the threat analytics piece, but you can expand this to any analytic tool that can integrate into that as well. Responding. Now, responding is super important now. We talk a little bit about response, and if you can look at Rick's white paper, there's a lot of concept aspect on response. But I think there's a couple of things here. One, there are 2 big areas of response that are built into the Veeam platform. One is dynamic documentation. As your organization changes from a disaster recovery perspective, keeping up to date on how to do a recovery is real painful. Now the systems should do that yourself. Why should you do that as the backup admin? Let the systems do that. So as new workloads come on board or when new data comes on board, these systems are now smart enough to understand that, integrate that into the DR plan, and update that documentation so it knows how to recover from that from a disaster recovery, from a prioritization perspective, from a runbook perspective, and it can actually build all those orchestration pieces for me. It's a really important piece of any recovery aspect as well. And then recovery as well. And there's a couple of interesting things I just want to point out here. One, I need to have confidence that what I recover is also malware free. because I don't want to recover malware back into my organization. So secure restore, being able to scan what I'm restoring to ensure that is not affected by malware is a must when I think about that. Two, I could do, maybe I'm like, okay, but I am really pedantic. I want to really ensure that this is secure. I want to absolutely restore it to an isolated environment. I don't have to build that up. I don't have to whip up to AWS and create an isolated environment in its own VLAN and then restore it into that. Feels super painful. What a real waste of an afternoon. I can actually just utilize my data labs technology within VBR and say, hey, restore that application or that set of data into an isolated environment for me and whip it up. And it will completely do that. And it'll be very isolated, won't be part of your production. It could integrate into production through secure connection. So if you need, it needs to talk to your AD service or something like that, it can do that. But the great thing about this is I can actually have an isolated environment where if I wanted to do some double checking or double testing, I could do that without any risk into my production environment. The other one I'd like to point out there is instant recovery. As I said before, if you're down, you're costing yourself $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 an hour, and you want to be back as fast as possible. The instant recovery capabilities that that Veeam provides around, especially in our VMware platform, can mean you can be up within minutes. You can deploy, restore those virtual machines and have them up within minutes. So that means your downtime could be, way less than an hour once you've identified, maybe a system that's been under attack. You can isolate it, quarantine it, and then deploy a backup of that within, as I said, within literally minutes to be up and running with very little effect on the organization. All right, so we talked a little bit about the resiliency. So education is super important, and both users in the sense of how to think about phishing and spear phishing, but also administrators. Again, as I talked about before, RDP is probably the second largest issue when it comes to piggybacking malware into our organization. So, educating administrators on role-based administration, not having master accounts across everything, things like that. It sounds simple, but they're sort of things to live by, right? Secure RDP, VPNing RDP, changing ports, things like that are just really, really important when we think about those pieces. Backup and recovery implementation. I need to think about when I deploy any type of modern backup solution to ensure that I'm creating a multi-layer level of security. I shouldn't have the one account, the big God account that can be part of all. I can actually do role-based administration. So if something, if a malware attack has got credentials, its damage is very limited to just what that role can be, that role can access. So that's a really important thing when we think about implementing, backup solutions. Role-based administration, authentication is super important in the way we do things, and making sure that I have, some form of replicated store that's going to be immutable, whether that's on premises or in the cloud. It can be both, and there are value in both of them. But you choose that which you want. But I think it's a complete must to have that replicated system. A solution like VBR can automatically replicate to whatever system you want, whether that's an appliance-based system, a software appliance-based system on premises, or even an object-based storage system, in the cloud. It's a super important sort of piece to have. And then remediation plans. You have to have a plan in place. If something goes wrong, what's the plan? What's the 10-step process that you need to walk through? And that includes the things like communication plans and stuff like that. So, when we sort of talk about a couple of these things, I talked a little bit about detection before, in the sense that, you can hook into the API and you can look at, various things happening with the backup. We actually have the ability, because we talk to many of the machines from a backup perspective, and our Veeam capability, you can do CPU and write detection rates. So we can actually look at the logging of those of those machines and say, hey, these machines are acting off, like, they're 100% CPU and they're not normally at this time and stuff like that. So it gives you for VM1, it gives you an easy way to actually deploy another version of ransomware detection on those machines as part of your backup strategy. Now, we talked about 321 and immutable backups and integration and many of those other things as well. But I think you can see here from a capability perspective, a lot of the Veeam solutions are really focused at ensuring strong detection either through APIs or through real time, strong backup strategy around ensuring super simple 321, integrating immutable backups as part of our platform, either being on premises or in the cloud, and then providing a set of backup capabilities through things like Sure Backup, which ensures, what Sure Backup does is it ensures that when a backup occurs, that it can completely be recovered. So I can have, I can meet that SLA that says, hey, are all my backups recoverable? Sure Backup enables backup 100% confidence that my backup is recoverable. How does it do that? Well, during as part of its process, it actually restores that data as part of it, utilizing data labs as part of its process, and it will go and check to make sure that that data is integral, its integrity is there, or it will whip up the application and make sure the application is up and alive. So it does that in its own isolated environment and then removes that environment. So it does it as part of its automated AI testing. Right, and so that way I know that I'm fully confident that that can be deployed. I don't have to test the restoration of that. The system does that for me. And then we talked about some remediation capabilities with Secure Restore before. Now, one thing I wanted to sort of quickly talk about here was, we talked a little bit about this. So one thing I wanted to sort of talk about here is when we think about immutability and air gapping, I want to sort of think about. I want you to sort of think about, when we think about air gapping, what does it actually mean? And air gapping can provide a lot of things. As I said, I talked a couple of things before, like tape and cloud-based solutions, but you can actually have a different set of what we call sort of air-gapped or immutable. Now, tape media is offline. I mean, that's purely offline, and we can call that an air gap. You can call it immutable. Immutable is really more online, read-only, but because tape requires me to, physically, manually go and restore that itself. But when I'm not saying that tape shouldn't be part of any ransomware solution, or you should replace your tape with an online immutable system. There are value from an administration perspective to doing that, but many organizations out there continue to use tape for our ransomware solution, and instead of having long-term archive storage on tape, they'll actually use like a weekly tape rotation for their offline air-gapped capability. So it's definitely a view thing there. Replicated VMs, another opportunity where you can actually just take a VM and replicate that through the system, and then actually have it in a powered off perspective. So you actually take basically replicating or copying a set of VMs into a secured read-only domain that's only available to be written to at a very certain amount of time, and all those things as well. Same with primary storage snapshots. Rotating hard drives, same thing as well. Very similar to tape, where I'm sort of rotating hard drives into the system. But the big thing here is immutable backups, and this is really where sort of the organizations are going around immutable backups. How to actually start using either on-premises or cloud-based replication systems with long-term storage. So think about archive storage plus immutability, bringing those things together, killing two birds with one stone, but also providing that immutability or air-gapped capability. And we're seeing a lot more organizations starting to use this capability as their ransomware solution. But as I mentioned before, this can be both in the cloud and on premises. Now let me talk a little bit about how we focus on this with our VBR technology and with this thing called SOBR, the Scale Out Backup Replication. So, Scale Out Backup Replication effectively is a software-defined process that enables me to create a secondary storage system. So if I want to create secondary storage based on all my wherever the data is living, whether it's NAS or where it's living on hard drives out there or some sort of appliance, I can actually then utilize my SOBR system to deploy this into any type of tiering I want. And the good thing about this is it's fully integrated into VBR. So I set the replication aspect that I want, and I can say, all right, well, I want to take a daily snapshot of all the data that's coming in from these areas. I then want to replicate that into my capacity tier, which is sitting either S3 compatible storage, it's sitting up on Amazon, it's sitting in Azure, or it's sitting in IBM object storage. So you can see that the vast myriad of solutions out there. When we say S3 compatible storage, I mean, the list is as long as my leg of all the vendors that support S3 compatible storage. So this gives you a real strong capability to provide sort of that immutability on any system that you want. And in fact, I'll talk a little bit about what we're going in the future. One of the things we're doing in the future is actually providing what I like to call near-line immutability, where we're actually building up, in conjunction with this, a Linux-based solution that enables you to use a Linux VMs to actually create that immutable solution yourself. So if you wanted to create a software-based version of immutability, we'll actually have that coming out in beta very soon. So the concept there is you could actually, in this sense, you have a set of data that's just coming through your performance tier, and then instead of writing it to your S3 compatible capability, you'll be writing that into a software-defined Linux based immutable system. And the thing there is that system is only available at a very short amount of time during that replication window, and then it's taken offline during that time as well. So it's basically offline VM storage, but it gives you the ability to have another choice when you come to think about your immutable capabilities. Now, which one you should you choose? This is going to come down to you and your systems, right? I mean, do you have if there's S3 compatible storage on premises, and many organizations have that, and they have vendors that are providing immutability capabilities around that, absolutely. As long as the core concept here from a mutability perspective, that's the value here. That's the sort of the last, as I said, the last best step from ransomware protection is having that air-gapped capability. There is definitely value in using Amazon and Azure at the moment, especially with Azure Blob Storage and S3 and integration into things like Glacial Storage, and be able to do replication into Glacial Storage, very low-cost storage, and have that as immutability as well. And then and then being able to, if recovery is needed, you can then up that from a cold tier into a hot tier to bring that back. Absolutely, that is completely capable as well. But the big thing here is flexibility of choice, right? It's not just, hey, you have to use AWS S3 object lock, for immutable storage, and that's it. The good thing here is you have the complete choice of it. As I said, the longest list of S3 compatible hardware vendors out there from an appliance perspective, Amazon and Azure as a cloud perspective, IBM object storage from an IBM. We talked about the near-line immutability, that we're investing in from a Linux perspective, through our future tech as well. So there's some really exciting options based on what you need, and you actually may have different versions of this as well, based on the criticality of those applications. So, but the big thing here, what I want to sort of talk about is that, and we've sort of talked about all day, is that when we think about ransomware protection, the recovery aspect has to become on par with the prevention and detection. It can't be an all afterthought here. And at Veeam, we're trying to make this as easy as possible to say, hey, it's easy as click as honestly about 3 or 4 button clicks to say, hey, I'm going to take my backup each hour, half a day, every day, whatever that backup thing is. But what I was saying before is that you can take all your data, integrate it into a solution, and actually have this completely integrated into your backup solution. So you can choose your object storage or capacity tier of choice, and have that flexibility. You're not locked into one set of appliances or one set of cloud, or one set of platforms. You have the choice of how you want to actually how you want to approach this. So a couple of resources that I'd love you to look at if you've got the time. We have a new ransomware assessment kit. So if you want to sort of get started in some of the things around Veeam from a ransomware perspective, the ransomware assessment kit is a really great way to go. A set of white papers, a set of resources, and evaluation can sort of walk you through those aspects on how to sort of start trialing some of the things that we talked about today. We have a new ransomware site. If you head out to the Veeam.com ransomware protection site, it's also in the nav drop down as well. You can.
So you were talking about next steps here with some of the ransomware resources.
Yes, sir. So these are the set of the ransom resources that everyone should. If you're encouraged to look at this more, we've got these set of resources available. Set of white papers, great education sites, and the ransomware prevention kit. So with that, on that piece, that's really what I wanted to sort of run through today, in the sense that hopefully that gave you a good set of information that some of the threats that we're facing, how they're affecting our organization, some of the metrics behind it. I think some of those customer out there, those unbiased metrics that we saw are really, really interesting. The proof that if you don't have a modern data protection system, it definitely showed, out of the customers that out of the general population that we did a bunch of research, it showed the vast majority of organizations that had a modern data protection system were very successful in recovering from ransomware at very little cost or at no cost. But if they didn't, there was they were definitely looking for different options, costlier options, and then a walkthrough of some of the ways that Veeam approaches on this as well. So with that, if there's any questions, I'll be super happy to answer them.
Absolutely. Yeah, we do have some questions for you. While we do those questions, I'm just going to bring up this poll for everyone out there that just says, what additional information would you like about the Veeam solution? So I encourage everyone to answer that poll in the slides window. Let's see, Michael, first question I see here, this one comes from Ethan. He's asking, with respect to backups possibly being compromised with ransomware, before knowing, how many backups and how long do you recommend keeping both on-site and off-site? What's the recommendation there?
That's a really, really great question. I can actually talk for hours on that thing as well. And you know what? The reality is it's a hard question to answer because, I was talking to one of the CEOs of a UK cybersecurity firm that works mainly with the Ministry of Defence over there yesterday, and they have said that malware can exist in systems for years, in various different ways, right? Because generally what they see is they sort of see three core areas. Once they see incident attacks, and that's generally most of what we're seeing today is, malware will get in, and it will usually only take a very short amount of time to attack an organization. So generally, in most of those times, the anywhere from sort of the 3 to 4 week data protection perspective would cover most of those. And in fact, most organizations, from a weekly perspective, can cover a lot of the instant stuff. But again, I think a lot of malware can sit in an organization and actually not be nefarious. It actually doesn't do attack. It's doing sort of data analytics. Because you got to remember, the way that most cybersecurity or cyber criminals are acting in this way is they're throwing tens of thousands of these out. They're phishing, right? And so a lot of the malware that some of the smart actors are doing is trying to think about what attack do they do. So they're data gathering, they're credential gathering or data gathering. And this is where things like secure restore become really, really important. So if you're not under attack, then things like secure restore can ensure that that malware on restoration could sort of help with that as well. Now, Rick's white paper, he talks a little bit about some of the mechanisms as well. But I said in most instant cases, we're seeing that organizations that have a strong 3 to 4 week backup strategy can recover quite effectively.
Excellent. Yeah, great advice. And like you said, that's a complicated question to answer, but also a very important question to have a strategy around. So yeah, I want to encourage everyone one more time just to check out the resources there. Rick Vanover's paper on beating ransomware with education, implementation, and remediation with Veeam is a great resource. Next question that came in. What about, they're asking, what are the ways to detect ransomware in my organization? How do you know if you have a ransomware infection, Michael?
Yeah. So that's well, one of the easiest ways is you open the screen up and it tells you. Right? And when that happens, you have that bugger moment, right? And I've had that once in my life, and you go like, oh no, like what do I do? I'm like, well, lucky I have a backup. So I think that's the easiest detection. There's a couple of other ways. One, I think, when we talked about before, changes in behavior. So machines that are encouraged by malware, most malware in its initial stages is doing analytics. It's trying to understand the organization. So it's using that PC or that server to either infect other servers or actually do analytics on other servers. So CPU memory and disk writes are the biggest indicators of early malware. And that's why we talked about the VM1 technology that can look at those things. And many other cybersecurity tools can do that as well. But that's one of your first indications that something's going wrong, is the behavior of a server or an endpoint changes because of that malware is doing things. So disk writes, network writes, are easy ones to find, CPU time, looking at that behavior, and creating a solid baseline of things that you should sort of look at associated with those. They're sort of the first detection pieces that don't stumble into a cybersecurity, malware sort of capture net, for sure. Okay.
Got it. Okay. I like this question from Stephen. He's asking, how do you prepare a management that thinks it will never happen to them, ransomware? And he said he's just asking for a friend, but I'm afraid it's really him.
Absolutely. That's a hard. I think what you got to do is you have to. One, I think there's a phenomenal amount of data that says everyone gets attacked by ransomware, and as I said early on with those metrics as well, and there's some further metrics as well. In fact, I think I'm gonna take all those metrics and kick off a white paper and ready for December or January, which sort of answers that exact question. As I said, it's not when, but if. Like, the overwhelming data shows that organizations are going to be under attack, and the large percentage of those attacks are going to be successful. And then if you add that with the results, that if you don't have a strong modern data protection system, even from a recovery perspective, if you don't, some data that I looked at yesterday, which is really new as part of our data protection reporting that's coming in through 2021. If you don't have a modern data protection system, basically 3/4 of your backup is only successful, from an average. So you think about that, like that 3/4 of my backup is full quality. That other quarter is maybe not as quality or integral as I want. And sometimes in that case, there's only 2/3 of the replication can actually happen. So you think about that in the sense of that attacks happen all the time. The chances are you're going to be attacked. And then when you look at the restore rate of a legacy system, the successful backup and restore rate from a disaster recovery legacy system, you could only be looking at getting 50 to 60% of your data back. I mean, that's frightful. And so I look out for that. Look at Rick's white paper. Look out for that white paper that's going to come into December. We'll put it up on our ransomware site, and we'll probably do a bit of advertising around that. And I'll take a lot of that data to help, that exact question, to be able to take it to your manager and go, hey, we need to think about immutable storage to be able to do this. And remember, immutable storage isn't expensive, and it's part of your capability. It's part of the system. You don't have to implement anything more in a Veeam solution to be able to export out to an immutable storage platform. You just have to have an immutable storage platform. And if cost is an issue, maybe this Linux platform that's coming out in our new V11 solution may be the first instance you can do. I wouldn't use it as your full, end-to-end production capability. For a large data center, you're going to want to look at AWS or Azure or IBM or S3 compatible storage on premises. But it's definitely a way to get you into the game and start thinking about divisional storage and divisional immutability.
Awesome. Well, there's so many good questions out here. I'm afraid we're not going to have time to get to all of these in today's webinar time slot, but it's really, really timely information, really cool statistics, and just so much detail that you presented on the event today. Michael, thank you so much for your expert presentation.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And sorry for my little blipping out. I'll ring up Spectrum and get really mad at them.
No worries, no worries. And thank you to Veeam for supporting today's event. Check out the links there on the screen: ransomware assessment kit, ransomware education site, content library, and also Rick Vanover's white paper on beating ransomware with the Veeam solution. Thank you to everyone out there in our audience. Hope that you enjoyed today's event. I hope you have a great day and a great weekend. Oh, hey, didn't we have a prize to give out? We did. We have an Amazon $300 gift card, and that's going to Ethan Shutika from Pennsylvania. Congratulations, Ethan Shutika from Pennsylvania. Again, thank you everyone for joining us on the event today. We'll see you next time. Have a great day.